but he will be on momentarily as well.
Hello. Don't go from there. Webinar is done. Hello, I'm terribly sorry. Can you hear me?
Sure,
Yes.
yeah.
Oh, good.
Yes, great. I'm so
Can't see you,
glad-
John.
Welcome. We're glad you're here. Can at least hear us, although we can't see you yet.
If I do share a screen, no.
No.
That doesn't work. Sorry.
So, John, while you're getting set up, Hugo has graciously offered to do a brief reading to give you some space to figure out your technical difficulties. So, Hugo, I'm going to throw it over to you. And then if we all get set up, would you like me to come back on and then do the introduction, or should I just stay in the background, or should we play it by ear?
Well, just play it by ear, yeah. I mean,
Wonderful, wonderful. So
cool.
without further ado.
Great. So, yeah, I'm just going to read a small passage from the beginning of the book.
You mean?
Here I am, stored inside a piece of hand luggage, being carried through the departure lounge at JFK Airport. The owner of the bag is a young woman by the name of Lena Knecht. She's getting on a flight to Europe, bringing me home, so to speak, back to Berlin, the city in which I was written, where I was first printed by a small publishing house almost 100 years ago in 1924, where I was rescued from the fire on the night of the book burning in May 1933, the city from which my author fled on the day Hitler came to power. My homeless author, my restless refugee, itinerant, stateless writer on the run, living out of a suitcase, fleeing for his life. His name, Joseph wrote, the title, Rebellion.
Okay. John, can you hear us? It was, let me see, John, I think you're muted.
No, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sure.
Yes.
Good. I'm sorry you can't see me. I mean, I would prefer that myself, but I don't know what's happened. Something's gone horribly wrong.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm sorry you're having technical difficulties. I wonder, would you mind, it's okay with us if there's just audio on it, although not ideal.
Fine by me.
Okay, well, Hugo just graced us with a reading, and I'll go ahead and just do this a little backwards. I'll do my welcome. Hello, my name is Chelsea Lake. I'm a member of the events team at Politics and Prose Bookstore. Welcome to PNP Live. Before we get started, a very few housekeeping notes. You can ask a question by clicking on the Q&A, which is located at the bottom of your screen. We'll try to get to everyone's questions, but apologize in advance if we don't have time to address yours. At any point during the event, you can click on the link that I'll be dropping momentarily in the chat to purchase the pages. We are delighted to offer closed captioning for this event via Zoom's auto captioning service. To access captions, simply click on the live transcripts option, also along the bottom of your screen. Now it is my pleasure to introduce this afternoon's speakers. Hugo Hamilton is the internationally acclaimed author of the memoirs, The Speckled People, a New York Times notable book hailed as a masterpiece by Cohen and translated into 15 languages. He is also the author of The Harbor Boys. He is the author of 5 additional novels and a collection of stories and an original play. He has been awarded the Order of Merit of the Federal Republic of Germany for his unique contribution to literature and cross-cultural understanding, pardon my dog, He lives in Dublin. Hamilton will be in
Wonderful.
conversation with John Banville. Olive. Banville is the author of 17 novels and has been the recipient of many awards. Without further ado, I'd like to turn the screen over to you both. Apologies for the dog barking.
No problem.
What
no
kind
problem.
of dog is it? What kind of dog?
It's a Havapoo, a very barky dog. She must have heard something. So,
A literary critic, obviously. Yeah.
critic of my introduction.
Dogs, though. Dogs, though.
Welcome and thank you both for being here. I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, Hugo. How are you?
Very good. Nice to be talking to you, John.
Yeah. We haven't met for quite a while. Anyway, congratulations on the book, which I think is coming out today in America, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, it's just out now. Yeah. Well, thank you.
So it zoomed to the top of the New York Times bestseller list, I'm sure.
Well, that's nice of you to say that. Yeah. Yeah, it's a pity. The Omicron thing has stopped people traveling around, but I'm sure things are opening. I'm here in Berlin, by the way, and you're in Dublin. Am I right, John?
I'm in West Cork.
West Cork. All right.
May account for technical problems.
Ah, I see. Right. Okay.
Do you live there now? Or?
No. I just I come here a bit. I like to come to Berlin.
And what's that room? You a hotel room or have you an apartment?
No. I have the use of an apartment here, so that's where I am. I kind of need to come to Berlin every now and again to just to speak German for a start. And I need to every now and again to be able to go into a bakery and ask for cakes in German.
I envy that. Years ago, there was a wonderful cartoon in a German newspaper, and it was one man strangling another, and the man who was doing the strangling was extremely furious. The man who was being strangled was perfectly calm. The caption was, "He's waiting for the verb."
Oh, yeah, that's good. Yeah.
So fewer jokes, right, and straight to the point. Go on, tell me about your book. Tell me more about it.
Well, it's probably an unusual idea, a book actually telling its own life story. And the way the idea came to me was I had heard about a book in my family, German family connections, a book which had been rescued from the book burning in 1933 and had been kept safe all through the Nazi years. And I managed to go down to Magdeburg to see an uncle who had this book. And that was extraordinary, actually, to hold the book in my hand and to think about the thumbprints, dead and alive, that held the book and owned the book and read it and so forth. And it seemed to tell the story of an entire century. And the idea then came to me to allow the book itself to speak. And so the book is almost like a witness to history, or a witness to all the people that it comes in contact with. And that's the story of the novel.
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful book, and it's very daring concept. I was full of admiration. I mean, I've done a few daring things in my time, but none like this. So congratulations. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
I mean, to remember Joseph Wort in our time. I mean, I wonder how many people read Joseph Wort now. Not many, I would think, in our time. Or do you think he's read? I suppose people would know the Radetzky March.
Well, that's right. I mean, Joseph wrote, he was a very popular writer in his time until the Nazis stopped him being published. He's still quite relevant here in Germany, and he's very much much more well known in the US than he is in Ireland or Britain. What fascinated me about him mostly is the fact that he was this writer on the run. He lived out of a suitcase, and that sort of, in a way, for me, chimes with so many people nowadays. Like he is the ultimate emigrant, or the ultimate migrant, traveling around Europe. He never actually lived in an apartment for very long. I think his publisher once went to visit him in an apartment, and he described him sort of walking up and down the room with his overcoat on, as if he was waiting for a train. He was never very far from the arteries of departure, is how I put it in the book. He lived in hotels close to the railway station.
I don't know. I mean, I'm fascinated by people like Roth and people in Ireland in those days. They lived hand to mouth or glass to mouth, mostly in Ireland. How did they do their work? I mean, there's a wonderful essay by George Orwell where he talks about the popular notion of the artist living in the garret, and, living on scraps. And he says, no, I need a coal fire and somebody bringing me cups of tea every now and then. And that's exactly how I feel. So I admire Roth for that. I wonder what he would have written if he hadn't been on the run, if he hadn't drunk so much, if he had been a different kind of...
I don't know, but that's... It's very much part of his makeup, the fact that he was a really heavy drinker, and I think his tragedy, the tragedy of being on the run, and that increased his drinking. What also had a huge impact on him was the fact that his wife, Frida Roth, had very serious mental illness, and their marriage was under terrible strain. I think his vagrancy, traveling around Europe as an author, impacted very much on her life as well, and I think very much disturbed her mind. And that, I suppose, is the tragedy as I'm describing at the center of the novel as well, how she continuously got worse and was eventually committed to institutions in Vienna, and was then eventually murdered by the Nazis under their euthanasia program. I don't know if many people grasp that, but the whole killing under the Nazi regime began in the mental institutions. That's where the first step was taken, sort of getting rid of mental patients, and she was in fact, Frida Roth was in fact one of the first people to be killed at Hartheim in mental institution. So that was, his tragic story in a way, and led to more drinking and writing urgent novels all the time just to stay alive.
I think he was a journalist as well, wasn't he? I mean,
he was a very well-known journalist. Yeah, he made a great living for. Yeah, he made a great living from journalists. He was a star reporter for multiple newspapers in Germany until the Nazis closed all that down. And he actually went on the run. He left Berlin on the day that Hitler came to power. So, and then of course his novels were not published in Germany anymore.
One of the things that fascinates me, looking back now and looking forward as well, is the utter stupidity of anti-Semitism. It's like saying left-handed people or red-haired people will be exterminated because they're destroying the state. It was so stupid. And people like Goebbels, I mean, he was not a stupid man. He wrote in the midst of the war, after this is over, we will either be seen as the saviors of civilization or we'll be regarded as the greatest criminals of all time. I'm glad to know that it was a letter. But at the time, it must have been extraordinary. I mean, it often strikes me that I wonder if that war and that hideous cataclysm that destroyed Europe, it did destroy it, if that could have been avoided, if there hadn't been these mad egos, Hitler and Goebbels, Goering, and Winston Churchill, I mean, Churchill loved to fight, he loved the war, but the world staggered into this terrible catastrophe. I wonder if it could have been avoided. And if it had been avoided, what would have happened? Look at us, we're on the brink of a bad war between Russia and China and America. It won't be done with weapons, but it'll be done with money. But it's still a crazy war.
Yeah, I mean,
I suppose it's ridiculous to say what if, but still.
Yeah, I think what's so interesting about the Nazi years and the kind of echoes that I am trying to bring up in this book about, there's a historical part of the book which describes Joseph Road, and there's a contemporary part where this young woman is going back to Germany, holding the book in her hand, trying to uncover some of the secrets it's going to tell. What's so fascinating about the echoes that are still ringing out from the Nazi years is the fact that it didn't start with the Holocaust. It didn't, when people voted for Hitler, they didn't know how it was going to turn out. So the whole thing began in an incremental way. It was like a sort of sliding into indecency from month to month, from week to week, allowing things to happen. I love the way Fintan O'Toole describes it where we are now. It's like, we're always in this pre-fascist moment where people trying things out. And that's what we have to.
I also like the notion that people talk about fascism and totalitarianism and dictatorship. Most Democrats in the West prefer to forget that Hitler was voted into power by a democratic vote. I'm not a great Democrat myself. Socrates was condemned to death by a couple of hundred layabouts one Tuesday afternoon in Athens. If that's democracy, I'd rather not have it. So, as I say, it's completely forgotten about in 1933. Hitler was voted in by the good people of Germany. And then they learned, to their great cost, that they voted the wrong way. But this is what people do. I'm sorry, we should be talking about your book, not about politics in general. Let's talk about your book. Tell me more about it.
Yeah, well, it is kind of central. It is kind of central to the book that whenever this narrator novel is talking about its own time when it was printed and about its author, it can't help triggering off these echoes of what's happening now. I mean, there's a character in the book who's a refugee from Chechnya, from the war in Chechnya, and she becomes involved with this character, and his life in some way echoes that of Roth and all those people who are banished. He's under threat from a current, neo-Nazi type person. So all of the threats that were there.
Yeah. Let me ask you something. It's a sort of loaded question, and I apologize for it. Did you have a political program in mind when you set out to write the book?
No, not necessarily. Like, I mean, the best answer to that is like, did I have a political agenda in mind when I was born as an Irish German child with a German mother and an Irish nationalist father?
That won't do. I that's very clever, but it won't do.
I mean, I had a political instinct from childhood onwards. So all of my novels have an element of that sort of watching the world, and they're not necessarily, polemical or trying to make a statement. But I've always been aware, certainly, of both my Irish side and my German history. That's apparent in all my work. And I suppose it's kind of heightened by this novel in the way that it's sort of telling the story of an entire century.
My God, what a century it was. Huh?
Mm.
In a way, I would love to write something about that period, but I wouldn't have the nerve.
About
the 1930s, 1940s, even into the 1950s. I tried to do it in my book, The Untouchable, which was, partly based on Anthony Blunt, the Soviet spy, but he never takes any of it seriously. I mean, the whole point of my book, here we are talking about my book, very briefly. The whole point of it was that he doesn't take any of this stuff seriously. He doesn't. He thinks politics is just a nonsense. That human beings are murderous and that they will destroy each other on a whim, which they do. And look,
you wrote all these. You wrote these wonderful books about Kepler and Copernicus, which were so inspiring.
Yes, but they weren't. Political. They cared nothing about politics. They simply wanted to get their work done. I mean, I wrote about Kepler and Copernicus because I saw them as creative spirits, not as scientists. I mean, one of the things I discovered was that the roots of science and the roots of art are the same. The plant grows in different direction, produces different flowers and different fruit, but the spur is the same. It's creativity. And if you look at someone like Mussolini, for instance, Mussolini in the 1920s was an intellectual, and they had to suppress their intellectuality in order to make this mad totalitarian world, which I presume they believed in. I mean, I don't think, much as I despise and hate people like Hitler and Goering and Goebbels, Mussolini and Stalin, and Zhdanov, I think they actually believed. This is the thing that fascinates me. The notion that the madness of belief. I've an old friend, and he's an old communist from the old days. I said to him, this is just nonsense. Why don't you give it up? He said, well, what I put in its place? I said, don't put anything in its place. Don't believe in anything. Why do you have to have an ideology? Life has not, we are not ideological beings, naturally. We want to live, if you look back at the beginning of our civilization with the Greeks, they had this wonderful system of belief, which was to believe in this panoply of gods. for everything that happened in the world, from a breeze wafting past you to, your death from some horrible sickness. There was a God doing it all, but there was always a God. I remember George Steiner once, and he's saying, "Yeah, this is why you all hate the Jews, because we made them monotheism." The notion of there being one God was absolute madness. So I would, and I think to go back to your book and go back to Joseph Roth, I think that he was a non-believer. And I wish that there were more non-believers in the world. Believers have caused havoc over the years.
Faith is a big problem for me as well. I mean, it's interesting you talk about belief. I mean, we're in a very strange situation now, like where I think with the new technology and social media, that people are beginning to, they believe fake news, alternative facts, and all of that. When you're talking about religion, I think we've always had fake news.
Oh yes,
we've always been making it up and believing the most outlandish things. It's in human nature to do that. I think what's troubling now is like that the media, the social media, it allows these fire starters, as I call them, like people who actually make their name on saying the most outrageous things. I remember my mother talking about the Hitler years when she was quite young, and she said suddenly you had the radio in the living room, and suddenly you had Joseph Goebbels talking in the living room, and you couldn't get rid of him. And he was barking away about all kinds of nonsense, and he was actually uninvited, but he was in your living room and you couldn't get rid of him. Nowadays, you have people like Trump and other kinds of autocratic voices on your phone, and he's in your pocket, and you can't get rid of them either, So there is a sort of a parallel in how the media actually dictates history in some way. It kind of it's a technology itself in a way that we have to get used to and overcome and master. And in the meantime, we have all these fire starters spouting nonsense.
Yeah, but we won't, we won't overcome technology. I mean, technology, you can't turn it back. We can't unlearn what we know. That's very good. It would be very good for human beings if we could unlearn things, if we could forget. After 1945 and after Hiroshima, lots of scientists approached Roosevelt and Truman. Truman said, we've got to stop this. And Truman said, you guys invented it, now we have it. And the Ruskies haven't got it at the moment, and of course the Ruskies got it very quickly, thanks to a lot of very clever spies, Donald McLean being the main one. So they got the bomb as well. Now we're stuck with this. But, the bomb was kept peace, world peace, since 1945. Otherwise we would have destroyed each other. If we got bigger and bigger tanks, bigger and bigger bombs, not nuclear bombs, but, they were dropping 1,000-pound bombs in London. Dropping 1,000-pound bombs in the middle of Mayfair and in the middle of Dresden, in the middle of Berlin during the war. Now we have this thing that we can't, we just can't drop it because none of us will survive. I love that wonderful line. And remember that great Stanley Kubrick film, Dr. Strangelove, where the general is going off and he realizes there's going to be a Holocaust. He says to his girlfriend, he says, she's there in her bikini, he says, say a prayer, sweetie. Because he He knows the world's going to be destroyed. This is extraordinary. You see, my generation, I was born in 1945. My generation lived with the notion that, I go to bed tonight, tomorrow might be just an ash pit. That seems to have passed at the moment. I think people realized. Now the young are dealing with an infinitely more complicated world. Poor Lord Frida, the world drove them mad, the world drove him to drink, the world now is so complicated. I look at my children, my grandchildren, I think, I'm glad I'll be gone fairly soon. But the world that they will have to deal with would be just, maybe all old guys like me say the same thing. But something has happened in our time. Now, mind you, I was talking to somebody recently, one of these Silicon Valley people, a 12-year-old billionaire. He said, not 12 years old, but almost. And he said, at the turn of the 19th century, electricity came in. And everybody talked about electricity all the time. Every dinner party was saying, have you got electric light in your house? What bulbs do you use? And they were obsessed. He said, now nobody thinks about electricity. He's saying, in 10, 15, 20 years, nobody will be talking about this stuff. It will simply be accepted. It's because it's new, it's novel. But of course, by then, everybody would be completely locked into their phones. And the wonderful thing about, the awful thing about phones now, of course, is that they're listening to you and watching you as you're listening and watching to it. But as I say, old guys like me are always bemoaning the state of the world. Sorry,
that's very far. It's interesting. I hate to try and forecast the future, but in Germany here, they're all talking about how the nature of work will change all the time in the next 10 or 20 years. There'll be nobody working. There'll be all sort of, everything will be done by AI. And I can imagine you could imagine a lovely future where everybody just becomes a gardener. There'll be a nation of gardeners. And we'll have just public parks and things like that. I wish it would come to that, but I had to be forecasting a grim future.
I suspect now that you or I believe in such a possibility. People have too much time on their hands. And I've always felt, and I'm sure Joseph Roth would have agreed with me, one of the great driving forces in the adventure that our portrait species has been on for the last 10,000 years or so is the fear of boredom. People will do anything not to be bored. They will start wars, they will ruin their marriages, they'll do anything not to be bored. Heidegger gave some acknowledgement in his book on metaphysics. Now, Heidegger says that the state of boredom is a state of preparedness for something else. I don't agree. I think the state of boredom is a state of where we will.
I think one of the amazing things about for us novelists to be saying is that no matter how dystopian and how grim things might get, human beings live on optimism and hope, and even in a dystopian landscape, there will still be great love stories to be told. And I think that's, and there'll be, the storytelling will still be the most important thing in our lives. And the survival of the people and the survival of democracy and all that kind of thing. But for me as a novelist, and I'm sure the same thing applies to you, John, is that we live through our stories. I mean, we exist through our stories, and the stories we tell about each other, the stories we tell about ourselves, that will always matter.
Yes, are we not just whistling past the graveyard? Are we not just telling ourselves stories in order to cheer ourselves up? Nothing wrong with cheering ourselves up, but I don't think we should confuse that with stories tend to fantasize. I mean, you're in Germany. I love grim fairy tales, which are absolutely grim. There's the real world. There's, horrible children, evil stepmothers. That's the real world. The real world takes place at a much less fancy level than we work at. We tell love stories. I mean, love stories is wonderful. It's always fascinating to me. The notion of love has always fascinated me. That you're walking around in the world and you spot somebody. You say, goodness, that person is potentially a god or a goddess. I will love this person. And she or he will love me back. I will become a god in turn. And I've always thought of love stories as two mirrors facing each other, lying to each other. But these are necessary lies. In order to live, I suppose we have to lie. This is a great difficulty I've always found. I don't know about you. As a novelist, I found it's very difficult to write about a species that is constantly lying to itself. How is one to write a truthful text about a species that lives by lies? I mean, it's a fascinating project, but it's very, very bloody difficult.
Well, there's you touch on it there. I mean, I think there's something very wonderful and dysfunctional about every love story, isn't there? You don't like to admit it about yourself, but I think that's why novels are so interesting. Is that
novels are not all about love stories. Many novels are about the difficulty of life, the ugliness of life, the strange predicament we find ourselves in.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
I mean, the last thing I'm interested in is love stories. But I know that you're talking about love stories.
Well, I mean, human stories. I mean, human relationships and like the breakdown of and the miscommunication. Like, I mean, I think for me as a novelist, like that's what always fascinated me about watching my own parents, and I'm sure. They were eccentric in the way that my mother was German and my father was Irish, and they seemed like it was a great love story, but it seemed also to be this huge mismatch, and I think that's probably applies to every child. Every child is looking at its parents and saying, how did they ever get together? Like, I mean, and what keeps them together? So that whole thing about sort of people sort of being united and breaking up and the trouble that people have living together, that's always completely fascinating. And that's very much what I love about literature and novels and movies and everything.
Yes, I mean, the notion that two human beings can pledge, darling, I will love you forever.
I mean, you look at Joseph Roth, for instance. To get back to the book, their tragic love story. Because of her mental illness and her being incarcerated in the institutions in Vienna, it didn't stop their love story. He was still crazy about her. He had other lovers, like the well-known writer Irmgard Cohen. He had a very well-known sort of love affair with her in Holland, where they were both sort of escaping from the Nazis. And she said, he only ever loved one person, and that was Frida Roth. And in the latter part of her incarceration in the institutions, he went to visit her, and it's known that he actually spent a night with her in a padded cell. And for me, as a novelist, that was a wonderful opportunity of describing how a man would go and try and rescue his wife from a mental asylum, knowing full well that she will never be cured. But somehow, in his mind, he still believed that he could rescue her with his love. I mean, I think that's a fascinating undertaking for him to travel right across Germany, which was already under Nazi rule, just travel incognito on the trains and to try and do this wonderful rescue mission of his wife, who had already, she had really succumbed to her mental illness. It's a photograph. I'm sorry, yeah.
We are a remarkable species. We will do the most extraordinary things for each other. I remember I was about 20 years ago, I was walking the street, a beautiful summer morning, and I tripped and I fell, about 11 o'clock in the morning. And immediately there were about 10 people around me saying, "Can I help you? What can I do for you?" I remember lying on the ground. I wasn't hurt, I just hurt my thumb or something. But I was lying there looking up and thinking, if circumstances were slightly different, they would be putting me on a train going east. The same people who will help you are the same people who will herd the Jews onto the kettle drum. This is always fascinating. And I would be the same. I've always felt that the word evil should be replaced in the language by the word circumstance. There's no such thing as evil. There's no great force out there in the world. This is split religion. But given the circumstances, we would do anything. And we would feel justified. If we're given absolute freedom, then there's no stopping it.
Yeah, that's an interesting story, John. I've always objected to the word evil. It does nothing. You don't hear Germans talking about evil. It's not in the same way that we talk about it in the West, because I think we're so aware that evil, as you would call it, it comes in sort of these small increments. They twist on small moments, just the one you described. It can be sort of demonstrated in somebody either helping somebody who's fallen in the street, or not helping them. You wouldn't call that sort of a demarcation between evil and non-evil, but it's a very important moment, and I think it's interesting you brought that example up. Not saying something when somebody is being attacked is like just as bad as sending somebody away.
Oh yes, well,
silence was a sort of a major problem for the German people. The silence of not engaging when people were in trouble.
Well, of course, we as Irish people know that, we allowed the most horrendous things to happen. We pretended we didn't know. When I was going to school, I knew that the children of the poor at the back of the class were being abused. You'd arrive in class in the morning and the child wouldn't be there. You'd been sent off to an industrial school. I didn't protest about it. My parents didn't protest about it. So none of us is innocent. It'd be nice to have the notion that we didn't know. We always know. We always know. I wrote a piece where one of those reports about child abuse in Ireland came out 10, 15 years ago. I wrote an op-ed piece in the New York Times. I began by saying, everybody knew. I don't think I still haven't been forgiven for writing that piece. Because, of course, if I'd written in the Irish Times, we would have nodded the same way. But if you talk about Ireland abroad, you're not forgiven. So, wickedness, let's say wickedness, wickedness contained within the community. We'd say, oh yes, terrible, isn't it? If you talk about the abroad, it's as I say, not forgiven. But we kept silent. We kept silent just like everybody else. We knew that children were being sent off to these horrible institutions where they were, slave laborers. They were subject to the most horrendous sexual and physical abuse. We knew. So, to go back to your book, wrote in a way.
Yes, it's a terrible thing to look back on all that grief and pain and the violence inflicted on women in Ireland, but it's wonderful now to think that we as a country, as a nation, have come around to facing up to all of that. I mean, that's yes. I mean, we still have more work to do, and like many countries have work to do with memory and trying to come to terms with what went on. But it is something to be celebrated always, I think, and I think Ireland is making a wonderful step in doing that. I mean, I'm not saying the victims are being treated fairly or anything like that. I'm just saying that we have opened up our hearts in Ireland, and I think that's something I've seen happening very much in Germany as well. That the Germans went out about their history in a very methodical and a generous way, ultimately. And there's, I'm living here in Berlin now at the moment, and there's not a street that you go down here without some kind of memory of what happened in the Holocaust. There are monuments everywhere. It's a city of memory. It's a city of memorials. And I think that's an important example that Germany sets for the rest of the world. In particular, countries that sort of just refuse to acknowledge history and just say, oh, well, we've moved on, we're different now, I think that's something that I admire about Ireland at the moment as well, that we've
But I don't think Ireland is not Germany. Germany grew up after the war and said, yep, did all these things, we'll accept responsibility. Do you think Ireland's accepted responsibility for what we did?
I'm saying we're beginning to do that, yes.
Yeah, but, this is 20 years later. Dog doesn't agree. This is 20 years later. What we're doing in Ireland is we're trying to say, Yeah, it was terrible, wasn't it? Oh, it was a real shame. Now, what's
No, but
next?
I think one of the best ways in which we do that kind of working on memory is through the arts. I think there are wonderful novelists nowadays writing about sort of what went on in Northern Ireland. I mean, Milkman must be one of the most extraordinary books that could have come out of Ireland in the recent past, about a woman under surveillance. That sort of opportunity to look at history and look at ourselves deeply in the soul. I mean, it is a great territory for novelists, and it is ultimately the best way of dealing with history. At least that's what I'm trying to do. That's what I'm trying to do as a novelist. Yeah.
You're a human being. No, I don't believe in the human project. I think that we're a terrible mistake. I think we're the most appalling virus this poor planet has ever suffered. And we're busily destroying it. Unless, the planet.
I hope you're not speaking for me now, John.
No, I know I'm not. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying I'm being complete opposition to, absolute opposition to. I'm not a humanist. I'm not I just don't believe in the human project. I think we're a terrible mistake.
I know. I think humans are capable of the most extraordinary and wonderful things. I mean, okay, we do awful things, but we are capable of doing wonderful things too, and they're worth writing about. They're worth remembering,
Of course. We've arrived at a standstill. Aren't there people out there who want to ask questions or something? I mean, no? Just you and me?
This is Chelsea. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A. Do you want to pop that open, John? Or
yes.
Would you like me to ask?
Yes, ask Hugo questions.
Okay. Okay.
Hi, Chelsea.
Hello again. Okay, just a couple of questions before we close out. For Hugo, did you enjoy writing the narrator as the book? Can you tell us more about that? And do you think we value books and art more since COVID? So a couple of good questions in there.
Yes, I thought it was a wonderful, eccentric idea, and I did really enjoy it. It took off as soon as I started writing, and what was interesting is like it disposed of me as an author. It allowed the book to become this kind of omnipotent author, and in some ways it's not that different to the child's voice that I wrote in my own memoir. It's this eccentric voice from nowhere. Yeah.
And do you think we value books and art more since COVID?
Oh, I think so. Yeah, I mean, apparently, like, book sales have gone up everywhere. They're talking about huge increase in book sales here in Germany, for example. I think the same applies everywhere, even though bookshops were closed. It was great that through the entire pandemic here in Germany, bookshops were regarded as essential. They were on the same level as grocery shops and supermarkets. And I think that was a great thing. They should have kept them open in Dublin and elsewhere as well.
People needed that escapism. And we were all home looking.
No. Hang on. Escapism. What do you mean by escapism?
Well, I meant escape from the pandemic, from relatives and friends getting sick, from not being able to go into school.
But art offers you an escape, not out of the world, but into the world. Not out of life, but into life. That's the great importance and significance of art.
point.
That's true. Yeah.
Okay. And another question, one more question here. I'm so looking forward to reading your book. I'm a big fan. What were the challenges of weaving together real and invented characters?
That's a really good question. What happens for me in the book, like when I'm describing Joseph wrote, these are obviously true facts that his entire life is chaotic life on the run. What it does for the rest of the fiction is it almost authenticates it, where for one moment you're reading about a real life, and then you're reading about a fictional life, and then you're also reading about this wonderful barrel organ player who's described in the novel itself. Who's kind of becomes the subject of a racist incident on a tram. So these are kind of very real people, both the Joseph Roth character and the Joseph Roth character himself as an author. And so I think when you switch over to my inventions, I think the reader will sort of run with the fact that these are true characters. That's what I'm hoping, anyway.
Well, let's see.
Well, in case you're going to finish, I just want to say, this is a wonderful book. It is a wonderfully complex, daring, adventurous book, and it's the kind of book that very few novelists would risk writing in our time, and the reading of it is a wonderful adventure as well. So buy the book and read it.
Oh, thank you so much, John. That's good of you.
Well, I want to thank you both for being here, and everyone in our audience. Thank you for bearing with us during this unique Zoom situation. The three of us are Zooming in from 3 different countries, and sometimes that poses a challenge. So thank you to you two here, our author and moderator, but also everybody out there listening in as we dealt with these challenges. And please, if you're like me, I haven't had a chance to read the book yet, and I'm really looking forward to it. I've put the book link in the chat. It'll take you directly to the Politics and Prose website where you can purchase the book. We ship anywhere if you're local to the Washington, D.C. area. You can also do curbside pickup, although we are open if you would like to venture inside. While you're there on the website, I hope you'll check out our events page. We'd love to see everyone at another event soon. In the meantime, stay well and well read. Thank you both. What a lovely conversation. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chelsea, and thank you very much, John.
Thank you. And give the dog a pat.
Yeah, she's been banished for her bad behavior. Thank you so much. Take care.